Africa, we should be grateful that now in the year 2022, we can talk of apartheid having been planted. We cannot say apartheid has been defeated because apartheid lives with us in South Africa today. Um, we may be oblivious or act oblivious that and say apartheid is gone. Apartheid is still with us, but it has just changed its face. It is not as blatant as it was. There are no longer laws that enforce apartheid, but the legacy of apartheid will be with us for a number of years to come. I'm saying this thinking back in the years in the 1970s, that is 1977, when Steve Biko was killed. When you look back at the years when in the 1980s, 1983 to be precise, when people like Graham and Margarita Makaskill were killed in Empangeni by a man called Simon Pungos. I don't mean to open wounds, because the wounds of apartheid will never heal. What happened to black people in South Africa in the name of apartheid will never go away or be forgotten, because it's a wound that still lingers on all of those who experience apartheid, and its legacy will live on in many years to come. We are in this dilemma because of humanity. Humanity dictated that some people must come from Holland to rule us, come from England to rule us, come from Germany to rule Africa. But they did not win, and they will never win. They will come, they will never win. I cry when I think of our American brothers who were kidnapped from Africa to go and be slaves in America, whose generation now think that they are better than anybody in Africa, which is impossible. You can never be better if you were told to forget your identity, forget your roots, forget your name, and be given a name of your oppressor and be proud to be an American. You can only be American if you come back and take your name, take your pride, and go back to America and be proud to be an African. So that is not my topic for today, but my topic is about the man called the Hammerman of Empangeni. It's a sad story. It's a sad story that has been misinterpreted. I am lucky because I once met the brother of Simon Pungos. Simon Pungos was never a madman. He may have been traumatized by the experiences of prison, because apartheid prisons were horrible. People died, and people died in vain. And the prison warders didn't care if black people killed each other in prison because of the hardships that they were enduring. The white warders, who were mostly Afrikaners, celebrated and had braais. How can you have braai when so much blood has been spilled in your workplace? Makes me wonder. But there are untold stories of prisoners who died in cages, grinding crush stones with hammers. That hammer that Simon Pungos used to kill was the same hammer that was used to crush stones, to crush stones for gravel by prisoners. Very difficult work that will damage your eyes. In fact, it damaged a lot of eyes because when somebody crushed that stone, there will be pieces jumping out, shrapnels, damaging the eyes. So some prisoners, because they would put two prisoners in one cage to crush a big stone, one stone, and depending on how you crush, of course, sharpness will come out of the stone and damage your eye. That was another punishment, severe punishment, cruel punishment for those who had committed crimes, especially against whites. Even if it was housebreaking in a house of a white man, you would be taken and be classified as a D group. So this meant you would crush stones in prisons like Barberton, in prisons like Kanderspend, in prisons like Waterval, in prisons like Leeuwkop, in all the maximum prisons in South Africa, including the prison in Pietermaritzburg. People would be put in cages where they would be told to crush stones and make gravel. How on earth can you give such punishment to human beings? This was happening as late as 1980, 84 and 83. And prisoners would get tired of crushing the stone. They would say the best way in order for me to be taken to solitary confinement is to hit the other prisoner with a hammer. That is where Simon Pungos learned of beating another human being with a hammer to death. And what annoyed him was the fact that whites would laugh at that. They would celebrate that killing. So, and he thought, and he had nightmares, like he says, like what he said in court in the 80s, I think it was 1985, when he was ultimately arrested. He said he had a dream that one day he would come out of prison. He had been in prison for a very long time. And he said one day he'll be out of prison, and what he'll do, he will go to white houses and kill houses in their sleep with a hammer. And that's what he did. And if the writers who are unfortunately white describe Hammerman, some are honest in saying Hammerman did not kill children. In fact, he did not even kill women. He only killed one woman, and that woman was also a warder. That is the wife of Graham McCaskill, a prison warder in Mbangi. So he also killed the wife, that only woman, because she was a warder. So she was part of the gang that killed. So he had wanted to revenge himself, or even avenge other black people who perished in the hands of white warders. That was the aim of Simon Pungos. But we cannot call him a hero. What he did was barbaric. It is sad because he made offense, and some writers described him as offend. He was never an offend. He was never offend. He was well brought up, but because of the hardships that were meted to black people, he then resorted to crime, just like any other young black men who is deprived proper education and deprived an opportunity to go and work, where whites would say if you want to go and work in places like Johannesburg, in Durban, you needed a permit. You couldn't go from Zululand to places like Durban. Even the former president was once a kitchen boy in Innes Road. He was working there as a kitchen boy because that's the only way you could be able to get a permit to work in Durban. So he started as a kitchen boy wearing those white uniform for boys or kitchen boys trimmed with red strips. So he was part of that, and after that he ended up working for a company called Ropes, which was doing ropes in Jacobs. That is where he started his political life and met people like Moses Mabhida as an interpreter for shop stewards, because he was conversant with English, although he had no formal education. But working as a kitchen boy meant that he interacted with white children and white people, and ended up being fluent in English as he is now. So that was the pain of apartheid to blacks, that you need to learn the hard way. You know, this is exactly what they did when they undermined the kings and chiefs of those times. They would undermine, for instance, a person like King Insa, who they put a foot on his neck and showed his subject that he was not a king, he was nothing. And this is exactly what that white man Vaughan did to George Floyd, where he put his knee on his neck and make sure that he died. You know, when whites put anything on your neck, you don't survive. The same thing happened to Windsor. They put a foot on his neck and they chopped off his head and took it to Queen Victoria to see that as a trophy. And up to this day, the English have refused to bring back the head of King Windsor. That's an insult. Even if whites can say they love us, if they can't bring back the head of King Windsor, then we have a problem. But coming back to the story of the Hammermen went to jail during the years prior to the 80s, say before 1982. He was then released, but he had this hatred for whites, and he swore that he would kill each and every prison official, policeman, and judges. People like Trollip. I'm not sure which Trollip was it, or is it the Trollip, the judge? I'm not sure. Peter Trollip is one of his victims, but fortunately he survived the hammer. Fortunately, he and his wife survived. Nobody died in that Trollip house. But he had targeted those officials, and the guy who owned the shop, I forget his name, owned the shop next to the prison in Mpangen. Those were his targets, because they had refused him an opportunity to work. When he went to look for work, they looked at his pass, the reference book, and it had something to do with having been in prison, and he couldn't get a job because he had a criminal record. So he said if he cannot get work in Mpangen, there is no chance that he can get work anywhere. So he resorted to killing whites. just around the Mbangeni area. And Mr. Mpung also had a girlfriend working for some whites around the area, and he was staying in the back in the servant squatters with his girlfriend, who was a kitchen girl, and he attacked his victims from that area, because this is a girlfriend that he came across and proposed love to after his prison term, and he was staying around the area. In order for him to survive, he resorted to crime like robbing people so that he could look presentable and trusted. He had a very beautiful briefcase, black briefcase, where he kept his hammer. So whites would see him, walking around them, wearing his nice suits, presentable, with his briefcase, like some kind of an executive, and they will respect him. And yet he was the killer. He was the killer amongst them, walking amongst them, sleeping amongst them. And each time there was an attack, a police van would run to places like Ngwelezane, Esikhaweni, looking for the hammerman, and yet they left him in their suburbs, because obviously they knew that they had these laws that said black people should stay in places like Ngwelezane, Machana, Esikhaweni, and those other black areas. But he was living amongst them with his girlfriend, who was a servant to one of the white families. So that's the truth that they never wanted anybody to know. And I am perturbed to see that whites took photos of Steve Biko with his battered head, but they never took pictures of Marcus Gill and his wife with their battered heads. So it is just irony that shows what apartheid meant for black people. If you go to Google, you will see the head of Biko. It's hit with something like hammers, stones, or kicked. It's battered. But if you look in the same Google, looking for Marcus Gill's head that was beaten by hammermen, you will never find it. That is pure white supremacy. It's unfortunate. So Hammerman did his reign of terror from 1983 until he was caught in 1985. And his story goes as that one day he went back to his homestead in Amlalazi, and he found his brother suffering with no money, and Hammerman actually robbed his victims, although he never killed children. But if he saw something valuable, because he was not working, he would take those and use them, sell them so that he can survive. So this day he went to Umlalazi, where his home was, and met his brother who was suffering with no money, and they decided to go to a show. There was another white man who owned buses, because he was just against these rich white people. He wanted to just kill them. So he went to a show at the depot of buses called Washesha Bus Service, and he met this guy who was the owner of. So when Mr. Simon Mpung also got to his house, his homestead in Mlalazi, he then heard the plight of his brother, who was suffering, because he also was not working. And he then said, okay, get into my car, let's drive to Eshowe. So they got into the car, they went to the depot of Washesha Bus Services, and they found the owner of the bus service. One Mr. Bradvet, that is an Afrikaner name. So those are the people that he targeted. So Mr. Bradvet was very fluent in Zulu, so they went there and he told him very politely that they were coming to collect all the money that the buses were making, you know. And he then opened his briefcase, which had a hammer and a gun. He showed Mr. Bradford that, listen, we don't want to do you any harm. We just want the money. And this is another Afrikaner that was helping black people with transport. And the irony is that Simon Pongoza did not harm him. He did not do anything. He just threatened him and said, give us all the money. And Mr. Bradford obliged and opened the safe. And then Mr. Pongoza filled his briefcase with money, which was a lot of money. And he then, calmly took the money and put it in the car with his brother. But on second thoughts, he said before he could start and stood the car and left, he told his brother, he said he does not trust this white man. So he asked his brother, who was very nervous at this stage. In fact, he was shivering. Though Hammerman was cool, collected, he had been put to prison here. He did not fear white people. He knew that the only thing that white people could do is to put him in prison and he'd come out. So he calmly said, hey, my brother, I don't trust this white man. Just take the briefcase with the money and put it in the boot. So he gave him the key, and the brother went and opened the boot. And because he was shivering, he just opened, because he had the briefcase on the floor. He opened and closed the briefcase without putting the boot, without putting the money, without putting the briefcase in the boot. And pulled out the key and gave it to his brother. And they left, leaving the money and the briefcase, which contained the hammer. They left. And when they got to a certain forest before Tap Makatini's shop, there is a forest there. This guy stopped, the hammerman stopped and said, okay, my brother, go and get the briefcase so that we can share the money. And the brother went and said, hey, but I can't find the money. The hammerman got very angry. He said, I wish I could smash you with a hammer, but you are my brother. I'm not going to cause pain to you. Pulled out his gun and shot him in the chest, just one bullet in the chest, and left him for dead. But the brother did not die. He woke up and crawled to the nearest road, and there was a car that came at that very moment, saw this man bleeding and asked him, what happened to you? And the brother narrated the story that they had gone to rob money from Mr. Bradford's bus services, which was Washesha. And he was taken to hospital, and this guy went and went to verify what had happened. And he told Mr. Bradford that we had caught the people who robbed you. And that is how the hammerman was arrested. His brother spilled the beans. He said they asked him who shot you, his brother, and he narrated the story. So they went and looked for him because the brother knew exactly where he was. He went and pointed him out at the very same area in Mpangeni suburb where he was staying with his girlfriend. That's how he was arrested. That's how he got in front of Judge Justice Broom, who then swiftly sentenced him to hang. And immediately in that year, 1985, within a few months, on the 29th of November 1985, the Hammerman was hanged. And that was a terrible story for the struggle of black people against white domination, because this was a struggle. This man had suffered for years in prison, and he had vowed to revenge and avenge all those lives that were lost in prison, when prison smashed each other's heads with hammers in order to be taken to solitary confinement so that they can escape the torture of breaking stones with a hammer in very cold winters of Barberton and Waterford in Newcastle. This horrible treatment that was meted to blacks actually bred the likes of Hammermen, who vowed to avenge the black people. So white people should not think that black people have got anything against them. Black people are humble people. You can do whatever you like. You can lynch them. The Americans are getting lynched up to this day. We are also getting lynched, because each time an American is shot, my heart feels like it is being lynched. So lynching will never end. That is why we are saying, Ma Africa hlanganani, which means Ma Africa, come together. Let us love one another. We are on our own. Now the war is looming in Ukraine, and there's a threat of nuclear weapons being used. And the first target that Russia will destroy with nuclear weapons is America. And it is another lynch, because even Russians are white people. Never mind that they are repentant black people, but Russians are black people. They are also really don't care about us unless we do business with them. So they will unleash their nuclear weapon in America, and we've got a lot of black people in America that will also be killed unnecessarily. There is no need. That is why we are saying it would have been very nice that we had an organized manner of helping our black brothers in America, that they don't experience the wrath of the Russians. Because we can see that Hitler started the Second World War. The Ukraine and Russia debacle will take us to Armageddon, which is the Third World War. So it will be better for our Africans to die in Africa, to escape the pain of being bombed with Russian nuclear, which will incinerate all those cities that were built out of the sweat and blood of the kidnapped Africans. So we are pleading with our president and all the presidents of Africa that Putin should not unleash the nuclear until we convince our black people to come back so that they can be safe. it will be the worst of lynching if this happens. But all the same, we hope that sanity will prevail. Sanity will prevail. We have suffered. Steve Biko was killed in 1977, and we can see his skull battered, but we can't see the wounds of Prime Minister Verwoerd, who was also killed in Parliament, in the South African Parliament. Nobody shows those pictures, but we can see the pictures of dead Steve Biko. It's painful. And also the person who killed whites, the whites like Macaskill. We are shown his face, but we are not shown the face of the offenders. We are shown the body of Steve Biko. Here is the body of Steve Biko. This is Steve Biko in the morgue. They've got his name written, Biko, in the morgue. And we've got Steve Biko smashed by white people. We've got Steve Biko's head shown to be smashed by white boys, but we cannot see the head of Verwoerd. This is what Africa is all about. It's a tragedy. These are the buses of Mr. Bradford, the owner of Washesha buses. This is where Mr. Simon Pungose got his trap. So we are in Africa, and it is very bad that we had to experience such tragedy. This is the bad man himself, Mr. Mpongos, the man who killed whites ruthlessly. This is Mr. Mpongos. So he is the bad man. And this was Mr. Mpongos and his hammer. This is the hammer he used to kill whites. It's not, we cannot be proud of this. That is why Alan Paton said, cried the beloved country. This was a wasted life. Sometimes to me, Mr. Mpongos looks like Nelson Mandela. Maybe somebody might have told him that. But it was the dark history of our country. We hope one day we will be saved.